Nayato Watari was a shy and awkward 16-year-old boy who cared deeply, maybe too deeply, about his little sister, Suzu. Ever since their parents died 2 years ago, Nayato had taken on the role of both brother and parent. The two of them had been passed from one relative to another, never staying in one place for long. Recently, they moved in with their aunt, Tameo, a strange woman who lived in a quiet house on the outskirts of Tokyo. One morning on the way to school, Nayato passed through a sunflower field and locked eyes with a girl who looked strangely familiar. It reminded him of his childhood, when he and a girl once played in a garden that she later destroyed before disappearing without saying goodbye. At school, a classmate asked if Nayato wanted to join a club. As always, he politely said no. He had to take care of his little sister. His classmate muttered that Nayato always used that as an excuse. Then Toki, another classmate, approached him with an idea about joining a casual group, but Nayato gave the same answer. Toki respected him for being such a caring brother and said he was also really close with his grandfather. Nayato was glad that Toki didn't tease him like others, calling him sister-obsessed. Then a cheerful girl named Ishihara Yukiteri invited Nayato to a meeting about building a flower bed. Nervous, Nayato gave his usual excuse about watching Suzu. Still, Ishihara offered to drop off notes at his house since they lived nearby. Before leaving, she affectionately called him little brother, making his heart race. At home that evening, Nayato cooked dinner for Suzu and asked how old she had turned last month. 10, she shouted happily. Later, as he washed the dishes, Aunt Tameo arrived and teased him for looking like his father. She handed him an envelope with a large allowance and told him to buy something nice for Suzu's birthday. Then, oddly, she joked that giving him money felt like giving it to her big brother. Nayato found her behavior strange. She never left the house and always stayed locked in her room. The next morning, Suzu asked him for help with her hair. Nayato said she should learn to do things herself, but Suzu insisted that he always take care of her. They were all each other had left. As he walked her to school, she pointed out some soybean plants, the same kind their mother once grew. When he asked what she wanted for her birthday, she smiled brightly. She was excited he hadn't forgotten. As they walked, a blonde girl wearing the same school uniform followed behind. Later at school, Toki joked about Ishihara being out of Nayato's league. She had even rejected a modeling scout. Then he mentioned a new student, Takabana Satsuki. Hearing that name made Nayato freeze. After school, the same blonde girl from earlier called his name. Her voice sent chills down his spine. He tried to ignore her, but she chased after him. Annoyed, he demanded to know what the garden destroyer wanted. She smiled and introduced herself, Satsuki. They hadn't seen each other in 6 years. Nayato told her he hadn't forgiven her for ruining the garden. She apologized, but only for her to follow him. She said she had something important to say, but he tried to escape. When she finally let go, he ran for his life. A few blocks away, he picked up Suzu and rushed home, not wanting to be caught. At home, Suzu asked who the girl was, but Nayato just said it was no one. Then Suzu told him what she really wanted for her birthday, a garden where they could grow vegetables together. Embarrassed, Nayato tried to explain they had no space, but Suzu said he could just buy land. Suddenly, Aunt Tameo popped out of nowhere and offered her unused backyard for the garden. Nayato checked it out. It was wild and overgrown, but he agreed to try for Suzu's sake. As he looked around, Satsuki jumped out holding a gardening hoe, scaring him half to death. Nayato was shocked. He asked what's she doing in the backyard. She said she had remembered something she needed to tell him. But Nayato was annoyed. He didn't understand on why she kept following him. All he wanted was to finally start a peaceful life with Suzu. Satsuki, though, insisted he had misunderstood everything. When words didn't work, she acted instead. She suddenly pulled him in and kissed him full on. At that exact moment, Ishihara peeked into the backyard and saw Nayato and Satsuki falling to the ground, kissing like it was a scene from a drama. And Satsuki didn't stop there. She kept kissing him over and over. And truthfully, Nayato wasn't sure he hated it. He woke up later in bed, confused. Aunt Tameo stormed in, calling him a pervert, and warned him not to mess around in her yard again. The next morning, Nayato tried to tell Suzu that nothing was going on with the blonde girl. But Suzu, clearly jealous, ignored him and ran off to work on the garden by herself. Nayato wondered why Suzu didn't remember Satsuki at all. At school, Ishihara wondered if she had really seen Nayato kissing Satsuki. When Nayato showed up and apologized for missing the meeting, Ishihara seemed distant. Just then, Satsuki appeared, cheerful as ever, teasing Nayato about his interest in girls with certain features, clearly referring to Ishihara. Embarrassed, Nayato dragged Satsuki away. On the balcony, she returned the gardening hoe she had borrowed 6 years ago. She reminded him of the times they spent in Shinshu, how they became close friends after he offered her a tomato. His mom once said the girl had a crush on him, but then she destroyed the garden and vanished. In the present, Nayato asked her why. She still refused to explain but said she wanted to truly apologize. She even suggested he could punish her in a naughty way, but Nayato yelled at her to stop messing around. Feeling guilty, she left. Later, Toki asked Nayato to help with something. On the way home, Nayato noticed Ishihara avoiding him. She used to be his comfort in high school, but now everything felt messy. Then Satsuki showed up carrying Suzu, who had hurt her knee. Nayato panicked and grabbed his hoe, but Suzu explained that Satsuki had only helped her and even joined in the garden work. Suzu said she remembered Satsuki from their old house in Shinshu and didn't mind them being friends. That evening, Satsuki walked home with them. She claimed that the garden in Shinshu had actually belonged to her before the Wataris moved in. Before she could explain more, Ishihara showed up and asked to talk alone. The next day, she and Nayato met at the supermarket to buy supplies for the school garden. Suzu and Satsuki stayed behind to take care of their own garden. At the store, Ishihara asked if Nayato was dating Satsuki. He said no and tried to confess his feelings, but couldn't. As they left the store, Suzu suddenly appeared, clearly upset. Seeing her big brother with another girl, she became jealous and started scolding him. To calm her down, Nayato gave her a special gift, a blue gardening hoe he picked out just for her. He knew Suzu didn't like pink or anything too girly. While they were talking, Satsuki quietly slipped away without saying anything. Then, out of nowhere, Ishihara blurted out that she loved Nayato. She said it was because of how kind he was to his sister. Realizing what she'd said, she panicked and tried to take it back. But she was so embarrassed, she ended up running away. Suzu looked around and asked where Satsuki had gone. Back home, Suzu proudly showed off her new hoe to Aunt Tamo. Meanwhile, Nayato stepped outside, wondering if Satsuki had somehow wandered into the backyard again. Sure enough, he saw a flash of blonde hair in the garden, just like that summer 6 years ago. Satsuki welcomed him back and asked how his date went. Nayato explained, awkwardly, that he was only with Ishihara because the rest of the group didn't show up. Satsuki laughed and said she wanted to go on a date too, but quickly brushed it off as a joke. Still, Nayato told himself not to fall for her tricks again. He didn't want to feel the same hurt he felt when she left years ago. Looking at the yard, he noticed it was strangely clean. Satsuki casually said she had kept her promise, not by pulling out all the weeds, but by digging everything up all at once. Without warning, she started taking off her sweaty clothes right there in the yard. Nayato quickly stopped her just in time. But then, as always, Aunt Tameo opened the door at the worst possible moment. Seeing the two of them like that, Aunt Tameo lost her temper. She shouted at Nayato, gave him a harsh scolding, and hit him with full force, making it very clear she was done putting up with any of this nonsense in her house. After Aunt Tameo stormed off, Nayato and Satsuki stood up and quietly moved away from each other. The whole situation left Nayato feeling uneasy. To clear his head, he decided to take Suzu for a walk and told Satsuki to go home. But instead of leaving, Satsuki followed closely behind them, saying her house was in the same direction. As they walked, Satsuki casually asked if they were moving again. Nayato, surprised she noticed, admitted that they might. He said he was hoping he and Suzu could finally settle down somewhere for a while. When he told her that his personal life wasn't her concern, Satsuki grabbed his tie and made him face her. Calmly, she said she already knew what had happened to his family. Though it made him uncomfortable, Nayato started to open up. As the sun went down, he told her about how he and Suzu ended up living with Aunt Tameo. Their parents' marriage was never accepted by either side of the family, and after they died, no one really wanted to take them in. They had been passed around from one reluctant relative to another until they ended up with Tameo. Satsuki interrupted, saying that maybe Tameo cared more than she showed. After all, she let them use her backyard to start a garden. Then Satsuki pulled out a few seed packets and handed them to Nayato. Before leaving, she told him that if he and Suzu ever got kicked out, they could come live with her instead. Later that evening, Suzu woke up and realized Tameo was still upset, especially since Nayato hadn't come home yet. She held Nayato's hand and made him promise that wherever he went, he would always take her with him. Meanwhile, Tameo had just finished her shower and was looking for her glasses, only to find her cat had run off with them. While chasing the cat, she accidentally ran into Nayato, who had just come home to apologize. Embarrassed, she ran back into the bathroom. From outside the door, Nayato got on his knees and begged her to let them stay a little longer so he and Suzu could finish the garden. He said it would take time before the vegetables could grow, and he wanted to stay at least long enough to see it happen. Tameo suddenly opened the door, now fully dressed, and asked for her glasses. After putting them on, she bluntly asked if Satsuki was his girlfriend. Nayato quickly said no, she was just a childhood friend. He also added that he had no plans to start any relationship because his only focus was Suzu. Just then, Suzu came into the room and asked if Nayato was done apologizing. Tameo looked at her and told Nayato that if he really cared about Suzu, he should focus on the garden instead of messing around with girls. Nayato smiled. Those words made it clear they were allowed to stay. Excited, Suzu asked if Tamayo would help them with the garden. Tamayo refused, saying she had no plans to do any hard work. Nayato found that odd, remembering how their father once said he and Tamayo used to garden together. At the mention of her brother, Tamayo's mood changed completely. She snapped at him, warning him never to bring up her brother again. Both Nayato and Suzu were left wondering what happened between her and their father. The next day, Satsuki joined them on the walk to school. Suzu happily talked to her about everything that had happened, while Nayato silently questioned why Satsuki kept tagging along. Satsuki noticed his gaze and playfully teased him, making the morning feel lighthearted and peaceful for all three of them. A few days later, the seeds they planted started to sprout. Nayato explained that they were growing a special type of radish that would be ready in about 20 days. Then he brought up a more serious topic. He had found Suzu's test results on her desk and was worried about her grades going down. Suzu suggested he tutor her. With no other choice, Nayato agreed, but not before scolding her a little and reminding her that she needed to learn to be more independent. She didn't seem to take it seriously and clung to him, saying he would always be there to take care of her. At school, Nayato remembered that midterms were coming up. Yukari offered to study with him, but he turned her down, thinking he might slow her down. She kindly asked him to at least think about it and then walked off with her friend. Nayato tried not to overthink it, but his friend Toki teased him about how close Yukari had been lately. Nayato insisted she was just being polite, but his red face gave him away. After Toki left, Nayato's smile faded. He knew Suzu might not be happy if he spent time alone with Yukari. That afternoon, it started pouring rain. Nayato didn't have an umbrella and watched as everyone else left school. Just then, Satsuki showed up and handed him an extra umbrella. When he asked why she hadn't walked with them that morning, she joked that she didn't want to interrupt his time with Suzu and had followed them from 5 meters behind. She teased him about sharing an umbrella, not realizing that Yukari was secretly watching from behind the lockers. Toki also saw everything. Back home, Nayato started to panic, realizing Suzu might have gotten stuck at school without an umbrella. He looked around her room for a raincoat, but instead found a crumpled-up test paper in her closet with a perfect score. He was confused. Why would she hide something like that? Before he could think more, Suzu walked in. Startled, Nayato quickly stuffed the paper into his pocket. Suzu casually said she had walked a classmate home because he forgot his umbrella. Nayato's expression changed and his voice grew sharp. Suzu noticed and asked what was wrong, but he brushed it off and quickly left the room. Out in the rain, Nayato felt guilty. He hadn't praised Suzu for her perfect score or her kindness. He realized he had always thought of her as someone who needed him for everything. But maybe she was becoming more independent, and that made him feel strange. Then he saw Satsuki, soaked from the rain. He realized she had lied. She only had one umbrella and gave it to him. He felt worse, like everyone was hiding things from him. Maybe even Suzu had been pretending to be helpless so he could feel needed. Satsuki noticed his troubled expression and gently reached out. Nayato said he was fine, but noticed she was still soaking wet. Quietly, he took off his jacket and placed it over her shoulders. He walked her to a rundown apartment nearby and was surprised that she lived so close. When she tried to open the door, the knob fell off. Nayato wondered what kind of parents left her in a place like that. Satsuki told him to go home and warm up, but when he didn't move, she pulled him inside. Nayato hesitated, saying he had to return to Suzu. But Satsuki said Suzu was old enough to be alone. Then she accused him of always ignoring his own feelings and building his whole life around Suzu's needs. Nayato lost his temper. He grabbed Satsuki by the shoulders and pushed her against the wall, yelling at her for saying things she didn't understand. Her silence hurt more than he expected. He turned away and muttered that she would never understand his bond with Suzu. Then he left, leaving Satsuki standing alone. As he walked in the rain, she sat down on the floor, blushing and whispering that she did understand him. Nayato kept walking, thinking deeply. Maybe it was time to stop living only for Suzu. Maybe then he could finally start thinking about Yukari. When he got home, Suzu ran to him, blaming herself for what had happened earlier. Nayato gently calmed her down and gave her sweets to make her feel better. He promised to come home earlier next time. Suzu teared up and reminded him about his promise to tutor her, saying she wasn't smart like other kids. That's when Nayato pulled out the perfect test paper. Suzu's face changed. She grabbed the paper, crumpled it again, and threw it away. Nayato picked it up and told her she didn't need help with math. But Suzu insisted that the score was a one-time thing. She still needed him for everything else. Before Nayato could answer, the room started spinning. His legs gave out and he collapsed. Suzu panicked and ran to call Aunt Tamayo. The next day, word spread at school that Nayato was absent. At home, Suzu refused to leave his side, even though Nayato warned she might get sick too. He kept trying to convince her to go to school, and eventually she agreed. By noon, Nayato woke up and sensed something was off. Sure enough, Satsuki was lying in bed right next to him, staring like nothing was strange. He tried to scold her, asking how she even got inside, but she ignored the question and apologized for getting him sick. She offered him medicine, but it turned out to be a children's suppository. Nayato stared at it in horror, shocked that she remembered such a weird detail about him. She explained it was the kind his mother used to give him. He told her to go to school, but she calmly said school only had morning classes and it was already past noon. She also mentioned trying several ways to wake him up, teasingly hinting they were unusual. Before he could respond, the doorbell rang. Nayato struggled to his feet and opened the door to find Yukari looking worried. Even though he was stressed, he let her inside. She asked to use the kitchen to make him something warm, and he agreed. The moment Yukari left to cook, Satsuki got up and said she would go. She didn't like seeing him with Yukari. But before she left, she sat on top of him and joked that maybe he wanted her to stay. Just then, Yukari called from outside the door saying lunch was ready. Panicking, Nayato quickly pulled Satsuki under the blanket and dove in after her. Yukari came into the room with a warm smile, placing a bowl of food beside him, completely unaware of the blushing Satsuki hidden under the covers. Nayato lay frozen, heart racing, wondering how he would get out of this mess. That marks the end of today's anime recap. If you enjoyed the video and want more of it, please support the channel by leaving a like and subscribe. Let's help us reach a current goal of 10K subscribers.